Hey guys, what's going on? It's me. We're here over vacation. I'm glad you're listening to me on the interest group front today. So let's get started. Number one, interest groups have been around forever. They talked about that in Federalist 10, goes back to the factions. And, we've seen them. There have been various times where they've gone, back and forth. Clearly today it's definitely changed where, social media affects a little bit more of how they are operated with likes and how people are recruited, also money within the Citizens United thing and how much they could spend. So interest groups are around, they will be around, we need to find out more about them. All right, so first let's differentiate between what a social movement is versus an interest group. So social movements obviously would be like our civil rights movement. It's for people that feel underrepresented. Women's rights movement, basically any movement where we've denied rights to one group or another, including maybe even Tea Partiers. You could include them in there. They're seeking to change, obviously, government. They're seeking to change it. It's not necessarily one unified group. It's a grassroots level. They'll spread throughout the nation as they develop. A lot of times the interest groups will form as an offshoot of those social movement policies. So NAACP would form off of the civil rights movement. National Organization of Women would form off of the women's rights movement, and so on and so forth. All right, now let's get into the types of interest groups. First are public interest groups, and here I threw three examples at you, and I'm sure you've seen articles or videos of MoveOn.org during elections. They spend a lot of time on those things. It tends to be a little bit more of a liberal group. You also have the League of Women Voters. They spend a lot of time, obviously, educating women on how to vote, how often to vote, getting them involved in voting altogether. And then there's the Environmental Defense Fund, which we've done a great job of ignoring. You can see how our North Pole is raised 50 degrees yesterday or the day before, and obviously that's an issue. So those are our public interest groups. So they might receive more news coverage than actually they deserve because they're not spending as much money, and that's one of the powers of these groups. They tend to not directly profit from policy changes. However, they'll attract donations from individuals, and obviously they'll be out there campaigning for obviously one candidate versus another. Now, our second type of interest group are economic interest groups. Okay. And obviously, once you become a worker, which will be coming up in your very near future, that you might be a member of one of them. Okay, so like if you're going to become a member of our labor union, you'd probably be a part of the AFL-CIO. That's one of our largest interest groups, and obviously they'll protect the rights of union workers, although our unions have definitely fallen, and they're not up to the standards of Europe per se. You also might be a part of a trade association in the future if you're a part of like the National Association of Manufacturers. Those interest groups will look out for the interests of that group. And then at the other front, you have professionals that form interest groups, like the American Medical Association. They're going to protect the interests of doctors, and they'll push out those things. So when we look at that, they are big deals because what are we looking at the rest of our lives is money and how it affects us. So these economic interest groups will play a huge role within not only government in general, but within election cycles. All right. Next, we have governmental units. So by governmental units, really what we're talking about is federalisms and offshoots of that. So you'll have the National League of Cities. So they'll be fighting for, obviously, garnering more money for cities. And if you looked around Meriden, we've done a decent job of getting federal and state money. So in the state of Connecticut is also through the National Governors Association, petitioning the federal government. It's ways to get money from the federal government and lobby for that. And we've seen direct examples of this throughout our time. So, that's another form of an interest group. It's not necessarily like a interest group per se, like a MoveOn.org, but it is, and it takes up a great deal of money within our federal government for different areas. All right. Our next type of interest group is a PAC. And I think we've talked about this before. We definitely heard it before, where a PAC is a political action committee. Okay. Now, they obviously represent businesses or other ideological interests. PACs can give up to $5,000 to a candidate committee per election. They could also give up to $15,000 annually to any national party and $5,000 annually to any other PAC. Okay. PACs may receive up to $5,000 from any individual. PAC or party committee per calendar year. A PAC must register with the FEC within 10 days of its formation. So there tends to be a lot of paperwork that goes into this, and you could follow the money. And obviously, as you can see here, that we have Lockheed International, or Lockheed Martin, Honeywell International, AT&T, National Beer Wholesalers. These are not tiny groups. And obviously, by spending money, it has, helped them out. And then you also see at the bottom here, top 20 PACs by total communication cost. There's only one group there, and that goes back again to the power and the spending of the NRA. So off of PACs, we're always trying to figure out, okay, well, this is what a PAC is, and we could look at these and talk about them, and then they're like, okay, well, what's a super PAC? All right, great question. So a super PAC is a new type of PAC that was created in the U.S. Court of Appeals decision in Speech Owl versus FEC in 2010. These PACs make no contributions to candidates or parties. They do, however, make independent expenditures in federal races. So they'll run ads, they'll send mailings, they'll communicate. What I always think of, again, is the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth in 2004, where they ran ads against John Kerry. That was a super PAC. And they threw in for this issue, which also tended to be against the presidency. So in a roundabout way, it was against John Kerry and for George Bush, although specifically it was not. There's no limits or restrictions on the source of funds that may be used for these. And obviously, thanks to Citizens United, people could throw in as much as they want because that's their free speech. They must file regular financial reports with the FEC, which include donors along with their expenditures. So obviously, when we talked about the Stephen Colbert Super PAC, it's a great article where you could trace the money and what was done with that. He actually wanted to be traced, whereas other people, they definitely don't. And again, if we look at this list here, and this is right from what's going on right now, so 2016, this tends to be, when you look at the super PACs that are raising the most money, tends to be mostly for Republican groups. Right now, Women Vote tends to be the first liberal group that you'll see within that, and this came directly from the internet. All right, now, our next type of interest group is religious interest groups, and one of the first ones is the Christian Coalition. This was formed in 1989 by Pat Robertson, and here you can see the mailing they sent home in order to attract voters to vote for Mitt Romney versus not voting for Barack Obama. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake there. So we look here, types of interest groups. There's also civil interest groups. So civil rights interest groups, obviously we look at the NAACP, and they've been successful in fighting cases before the Supreme Court and garnering rights for African Americans. Here's their mailing about the stop and frisk law, which they were successful in ending that within New York City. Here you have National Organization of Women, and they're pushing for, obviously, within this protest, keeping abortion legal, which we've seen many of those rights stripped away since Roe v. Wade, which we'll be talking about more in the future as well when we get to Supreme Court. And then at the bottom, we have National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, who have been fighting for rights for, obviously, the national gay and lesbian groups, the NGLBT. All right, and I screwed that up. We'll figure that out later. All right, next we have types of interest groups. There's a single interest groups. There is the NRA, and there is, and I keep screwing this thing up, but we're going to get it down, the Coalition to Ban Gun Violence, the CBGV, okay, which is not an easy acronym to remember. So you have one that's fighting for gun rights and one fighting for gun control. Off of that, you also have two sides of the abortion debate, where you have sides fighting for one thing or the other. Or, and nobody really fights against this group, is MAD, Mothers Against Dangerous Decision. They've done great things in arguing for their group. All right, so now what do interest groups do? All right, well, number one, they motivate like-minded individuals to work together. And number two, they will force politicians to basically do their job or to do what they're bidding. All right, and lobbying is one of the major works that they do. Okay, and now we'll talk about lobbyists. So lobbying and lobbyists, obviously this is Jack Abramoff here. This is a fictional character, which we're going to look at a couple of clips of how he lobbied when we get back, not the entire thing. Lobbyists, we're not really sure where it came from, but generally it was people waiting outside of the Capitol building when that lobby area for politicians come out and influence them and get them to do what they want. So lobbying, what we're going to talk about first is how we lobby Congress, and that tends to be the group that gets lobbied the most often. So you might get individual letters, emails from interested constituents. You might get money or outright payment, which would be illegal. Or you hire staffers. Jack Abramoff ran the gamut on this. If you watched it this past summer, the Casino Jack, where the tactics he did to buy lawmakers and get his bidding done. Okay, here's a list of our top lobbying firms and how they generally stack up. Here's their clients, and obviously all of these groups have done very well within our system. And here's where we talked about the revolving door of people that work for Congress, then work as lobbyists, and people that come back. So obviously a lot of people see a lot of corruption, a lot of issues within lobbying because of this. Outside of lobbying Congress, though, you'll also lobby the executive branch. In the book, they talk about how the National Women's Rights Group was arguing for lobbying the educational branch to pay attention to Title IX. And we've seen Title IX soar through our entire time in the U.S. because of obviously creating it and then actually enforcing the Title IX. So the education department's done a great job with that. All right, next we have lobbying the Supreme Court, and this is a big deal. And we talked about that before. We talked about how the NAACP had made a lot of strides for African Americans through winning a bunch of Supreme Court cases, and that was their big contribution to civil rights, one of their major ones. Currently, right now, we had King versus Burwell, which was filed through an amicus curiae brief. Amicus curiae literally means friends of the court, presented an argument in favor of, obviously, they went to one sentence in Obamacare, claimed that it was not a good thing. Specifically, it was crafted by Michael Cannon through a libertarian think tank called the Competitive Enterprise Institute. They took that before the Supreme Court, challenged Obamacare, did not necessarily win, but it was lobbied. And you see people doing this all the time. They will, try to get the Supreme Court to make decisions on things. And that's a big deal as far as lobbying as well. So when we look at this, there's also some other things going on. So here's a listing of money that went to congressional candidates. Obviously, you can see how that money has risen throughout the time period. I believe it's rising right now over me. And how much and where it's gone. And generally, it goes in this blue thing right here is towards the incumbents. Incumbents tend to get the most money because I think it's easier to work with them. Money in politics. We talked about this a little bit before. There tends to be ways that they're trying to push this down. So as far as the limits and what can be done, they've tried to do various things to, push at different things. Soft money you might hear every now and then. That's money for parties, for party building purposes. Issue ads, that goes back to, again, the Swift Vote Veterans for Truth, where you're pushing one idea, but generally it's also associated with an election. And then you have, here's an example we've been talking about, campaigning through other groups. Interest groups found a way to circumnavigate that. They'll use words vote for or elect. And again, I feel like the two go together, issue advocacy and going through other groups. We tried to basically cut down on this, but it's failed. And we're going to check that out when we watch the 60-minute clip on Jack Abramoff. They passed the 2007 Honest Leadership and Open Government Act, which bans gifts, toughens disclosures. Again, though, that's just for private lobbyists. Public lobbyists could still do what they want. It also has like some weird stipulations, like you could buy a congressman lunch as long as you're standing but not sitting, which is odd. And then, the one thing that they always get back to is when we watch that film is that it's really not even the gifts, it's the access. When you create a situation where you tell a staffer, why don't you come work for my lobbying firm in the future? Generally, then you own that member of Congress, and that could cause some problems for that Congress member as far as whether or not they're doing the right thing or whether they're doing a thing for, that agency that they're working for. So I hope you guys understand what lobbying is now and what interest groups are and what role they play in, obviously, our government. And it's been something that we've been concerned with since Federalist 10. I thank you guys for checking this over. Hopefully you enjoyed this more than reading it. Hopefully you don't involve my pauses too much. I know I made a couple little errors here and there. My kids are screaming in the background somewhere, so it's caused some rather difficult filming. But enjoy, and I'll see you guys next year.